Hey y'all, it's Stephen Van Kampen-Lewis on April 3rd. Of course, as always, I'm going to release this the following week. So this is like early April 2022. And today I want to talk a little bit, well, first of all, I'm in my apartment, as you can see. So I don't have anything in bloom right now, and I'm not going to talk about growing orchids. But I do want to talk about some sort of orchid myths that need to be busted. So I'm starting maybe a series, but let's call this Unpopular Orchid Opinions. And I say this because what I'm about to say it includes some long-held beliefs, and there's a lot of people out there that think what I'm about to say is wrong, and I'm pretty sure I'm not. So, but let's get started. So, the first one is that bloom boosters are snake oil. They're not needed. You don't need to have them in your collection. If you do have them, just take it and use it on your vegetables or your lawn or something. There is absolutely no reason to have two different types of fertilizers in your arsenal of orchid culture and orchid care. You know, bloom boosters were originally used, a long time ago when we didn't really understand what orchids need and how little fertilizer they actually need to thrive. So what happened is that people would use really high nitrogen fertilizer because that's what they were using in the garden. That's what they were using on the farm. They would use the high nitrogen fertilizer to create green growths, new leaves on their terrestrial plants. And then they assumed that the orchids needed something similar. And so when nitrogen is used in a really high amount, like was given, 100 years ago or 50 years ago, it does inhibit blooms. So a bloom booster would lower the nitrogen and increase the phosphorus. And of course, that when you're thinking about nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, that's the NPK, those three numbers that you see on the side of a fertilizer bottle. And so the thought was that if you increase the phosphorus amount, the blooms would be better. But what was actually happening is that they changed the fertilizer and that lowered the nitrogen, and so that that sort of inhibitory effect of the high nitrogen goes away. So people thought that the added phosphorus was causing the blooms when it was actually the lowered nitrogen. So if you have a good balanced fertilizer or sort of maybe an MSU style fertilizer or something like that, and you're using it in the appropriate amounts, you're not going to have that nitrogen inhibiting the flowers. Your plants are going to grow and bloom just fine with one single fertilizer. So there's no need to buy bloom boosters. In fact, you can just go out and use your bloom booster in the garden, like I said. Unpopular opinion number 2, watering your orchids in the evening is bad. It's not true. So when you think about the orchids that we typically grow, they often have sort of a seasonal wet period. That's usually in the summer. And then they often have sort of a drier winter with, some plants being very extreme, of course, the Catasetinae, and some others, like a lot of the bifoliate Cattleyas, they have a water reduction rather than a straight up dry period. And so what you have in the summertime is typically monsoons. They'll come in late afternoon showers. In fact, we see those late afternoon showers in some of the more tropical parts of the United States. I used to live in Tucson, Arizona, which has a very distinctive monsoon season. And that monsoon season includes rainfall in the afternoon and evening and even into the overnight hours. And those orchids are just fine. So why is it that people feel that you have to water in the morning? And that might have something to do with, again, people growing in the garden. They would water in the morning so that the leaves are dry by evening, and that way any of the sort of pathogens, the fungus, the bacteria that attack wet leaves at night aren't active. They don't have as much fuel to sort of eat your plants. And so I think that probably carried over into the orchid world where, hey, if your leaves are wet at night, it's going to cause rot. Or if your roots are wet at night, that's going to cause rot. And that's absolutely not true. So if the temperatures at night are cold, if it's winter time, maybe you don't want to have wet roots. If it's summertime, your plant is going to do really well with a late afternoon or evening watering regimen, because that's what happens in nature. Also, I get home from work in the afternoon and evening, like probably whoever's watching this right now. There's a good chance that you also work at a normal shift Monday through Friday. So when I come home, that's when I have time to water. And sorry, plants, you're not going to get a morning water. And my plants are just fine. Not only are they fine, they look pretty good. So don't be afraid to water your plants in the afternoon or evening, especially in warm weather. They're going to do just fine. In fact, a lot of the respiratory action that happens with C4 and CAM plants, and those are photosynthetic pathways. Basically, C3 plants have 3 carbon chains in the sugar that they produce. C4 plants have 4 carbon chains, and then CAM plants typically do most of the respiration in the evening and the night. And there's a lot of orchids that follow the nighttime respiratory activity regime. So water at the roots, they're going to be taking up that water. They're going to be using the water. They're going to be doing their respiratory actions in the evening anyway. So a little water on the roots, at least, I don't know if it helps them more, but it certainly doesn't hurt them. Another unpopular opinion that I'm going to try and bust, or a myth that I'm going to try and bust, is that your orchid roots need to dry completely, especially during the growing season. So one of the common things that you'll hear is that especially Cattleya roots need to dry between waterings. And that is not true. They should approach dryness, and that they don't want to be sopping wet. But I'm hitting my plants with water every single day, basically when the temperatures are above 95 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's for 5 months or so. They're getting hit with water every single day. I use large grade Orchiata, and they're in a clay pot. So there's a lot of air movement. It's very hot. That water from the pot is evaporated basically in about 24 hours, but not completely. So if I was to take my pot that I watered the night before when it's 105 degrees outside, and then I dump it out and I look at the media, it is not bone dry. It's dryish, it's damp. And that's sort of the ideal situation to get your roots into on a regular basis, is where they approach dryness but then don't dry out completely 100%. In fact, if you look at some of the best growers, and you unpot the plants, and they've got these big, giant, massive bulbs on the Cattleyas, there's a really good chance that those plants are not getting bone dry every single day or between waterings. So, it's a sort of a more nuanced approach, and I know it's probably it's a matter of, it's easy to say, let your plant get dry, then water, as opposed to sort of a more qualitative, squishy definition of when to water, and that's when your plants approach dryness. And I fully understand that, but again, this is another unpopular opinion that I'm conveying to you right now. All right, now time for my most unpopular opinion, or I guess the other ones were sort of myths that I kind of wanted to bust. And this is actually a full-blown opinion about a plant there's a good chance you grow, and there's a good chance you think that I grow it as well. And that is Monnieri Millennium Magic Witchcraft. It is it's a complex hybrid. It has flowers which are jet black, and at least in appearance, it's really a dark red that is so red it actually appears black. But it's got an FCC to its name. It is a first-class certificate, and for those of you who are not familiar with the American Orchid Judging Society Quality Awards, an FCC is the highest quality award that an orchid can receive under the AOS system. And it is a flower which I find supremely ugly. It is so ugly. The petals and sepals just look like they're drunk. The lip is usually twisted in some way. I mean, it looks like the flower got slapped around in the breeze as the buds were starting to open. A lot of the time, the flowers are really crowded together. They're not pretty, they're not attractive, and I suspect I'm gonna get the most negative feedback on this. So, go for it. If you disagree, I look forward to your comments. And I'm actually going to end this video not with an unpopular opinion, but a question about something that I wonder if is going to become kind of an orchid myth that a lot of people do. And I've seen a lot of orchid repotting videos with people using gloves. Why are you using gloves? What's going on? What's the thinking behind this? And I would love it if y'all would include what you think, or maybe why you use gloves to repot your orchids, or why you've seen other people doing it, or if they even explain it at all, if it's just something that started and people are kind of continuing without really thinking about it. I mean, we have soap and water, right? So soap and water is known to get rid of viruses from your hands. So if you're scooping out a plant and you're worried about maybe transmitting disease, soap and water can take care of that. This is not new technology. So anyway, I want to know where you think the glove trend, or is it even a trend? Is it just people doing things that they've seen other people do? Anyway, leave me a comment. I'm curious. I want to know. And I also want to hear some other unpopular opinions that maybe I can address on a later video. See ya.